Right, hello and welcome to this session. Today we're going to be talking about the SME Climate Hub and supporting SMEs to decarbonise. My name is Beverly Cornaby. I'm from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. I'm the policy lead for the UK Corporate Leaders Group, and also I chair something called the UK Business Group Alliance for Net Zero. Whilst much of the work that we do is with larger organisations, and that is where actually, there is a big focus because the size of the emissions that they need to manage and need to reduce. At the same time, we see engaging SMEs as really important. Globally, they form 90% of businesses. And even within the UK, it's much higher than that. It's actually 99.9%. We support businesses and startups because we see that they can bring new ideas, technologies, and new ways of thinking. At CISL, we have something called the Canopy Incubator that we are about to be opening at a building we are refurbishing in Cambridge. This is going to be an opportunity for us to host startups and small businesses and to come up with innovative new ways of working together. Now today, we're going to have a number of different speakers, and I'm delighted that, first of all, I'm going to welcome Andrew Griffith, who is the UK Net Zero champion, who has been working tirelessly this year to really engage SMEs within the UK. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, Beverly, for that super kind introduction, and to the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership, who, not just for hosting today, but who've been an invaluable partner on the journey. So it's really wonderful to be here. As Beverly said, supporting small and medium-sized businesses on this net zero journey is of utmost importance. And although my role spans businesses of every shape and size in the United Kingdom, exactly as Bev said, the vast majority by number are small businesses. And so from the get-go, it was incredibly important to me that everything we did could speak to small businesses, from the very smallest to the very largest. And that's not always how government thinks when people do campaigns. So we launched this in 2021. Really, it's been an initiative over the last 12 months, and building on the fantastic product that was already the ICC's SME Climate Hub. But the government decided, as part of building a crescendo of activity from business, and you'll notice that business is present at this climate summit more than ever before, because mobilising private sector action, the capability to solve problems, and the vast tracts of international capital was something that the government and the Prime Minister wanted at the heart of our agenda. So we launched the Together for Our Planet Business Climate Leaders campaign. We did that on the back of the SME Climate Hub, which is a product that we think is great, what I call age appropriate for small businesses, to cut through some of the complexity, to recognise the fact that for small businesses, the biggest opportunity cost is their time. And you're competing for very thin slices of time between doing the staff rota and the tax return and ordering your stock for the following week. And it was designed, as I say, for the very smallest businesses, a lot of which are sole proprietor businesses. So it really did have to be on that basis. I was supported by I'm going to tell little bits of stories so people can learn from what worked, and by all means ask what didn't work. But I had fantastic support from the Department of Business, Enterprise, Innovation and Skills. I'll get it wrong. It keeps changing its name. Industrial Strategy. But most importantly, I had support from the Department for Business. I've got Sam Lux here today, and they've been great, providing full-time resources, leveraging those constant relationships with business. And I always said, when we got it right, in every single interaction between government, civil service, ministers, and businesses and business federations, this would be one of the key attributes and the key asks of that. And I think we broadly managed to get that right. As a result, although it built from a small start, as of today, nearly 2,100 UK businesses have signed up to the Race to Zero, the vast majority of them by number being those small, medium enterprises. Another thing we did, and I think some of them are here today as well, and if they're not, I'd still give a big shout out for them, is put together a task force of large businesses. Remember, they have so much more of the capability and discretionary resources, but large businesses who interact daily with small businesses. So again, to give you examples, these were people like telecommunications companies, the tax authorities, as it happens, the NatWest Bank, who are a COP sponsor, and Scottish Power, and Intuit. So if you think about what we were trying to do was give a nice, warm, huggy surround so that all of the big enterprises that a small business would habitually do business with was also able to project the same message and offer the same level of support. So Intuit built online tools, for example. NatWest promoted their campaign in their messaging on their small business hub. And indeed, all of our partners were fantastic. So we hijacked those resources. BT projected the campaign imagery on top of one of their telecom towers in the heart of London and provided us really great advertising reach that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to acquire. And remember, small businesses are one of the hardest markets to target. Very time poor. We also worked with every, and I'm very proud of this, we worked with every business federation in the UK. Again, another design principle. If you're a small business, there is a little bit of a blizzard of initiatives. There's lots of kite marks, lots of things that you can sign up to. One of the objectives of using the SME Climate Hub is its unimpeachable credentials backed by Cambridge Sustainable Science, but also backed by things like the Science Based Targets Initiative, the United Nations Race to Zero campaign. So what we were trying to do is establish a first among equals kite mark initiative, not to detract from any of the other good things that people are doing, but to say to businesses, to simplify, if there's one thing you do, this is the thing. This is the way you get on that journey and make that brilliantly easy to do. And we benefited from that support from all of the business organisations, sometimes when they had their own initiatives as well, but those would run alongside. We then took this out on the road, and it's still out on the road on buses wending their way up to Glasgow that will arrive next week. But we also hosted, because of the pandemic, we hosted virtual geographic summits where we called them Your Business Journey to Net Zero. They were seminars, so they were tackling one of the biggest barriers. In fact, the only barrier, I think, because there's good awareness. Think about the normal journey. There's good awareness of this issue. There's a real desire to act. Small businesses in particular, our parents and grandparents, they have deep relationships of trust, and they're at the heart of their place-based communities. So there's clear desire to act as well. But where so often things fall down, and all of our survey data tells us this, is knowing what to do. The intimidation of knowing what is the right first step out of all of the others. And so these local engagement seminars, again organised with the help of the business department, were designed to be a pathway for small businesses to educate themselves. And they were delivered through the Growth Hubs, which is a typical go-to place if you're a small business looking for help on a number of other issues, that you'd go to the Growth Hub. So that's where we've got to. The journey is by no means finished. Indeed, I really think we're just at the start. And as we've observed at this fantastic COP, which is already proving very successful by any measure, once we fold up these wonderful pavilions, turned off these rather hot lights, put away the chairs, it is the problem-solving capacity of business that we need to deploy over the coming decades, hopefully quicker if you're a small business, because you have that brilliant ability to act really fast. You can make decisions in the morning and you can execute them in the afternoon, which is not a luxury most big businesses have. So we are at the start of a journey, but we're also at the end of a different journey. The UK has been, I think, disproportionately successful in what we've done to date, but my call to everybody here, and we would love to help you. we've got some lessons learned, and we would love to share those. I would like to see now the SME Climate Hub really go large, really go global, encompass the literally hundreds of millions of small enterprises across our planet. We only have one atmosphere. We all have to share that. So it's in all of our interests that we could really promulgate this campaign and really make it as successful as it can be. But thank you to those of you here who've been a big part of that journey, getting us to where we are. And I look forward to hearing from the panel some ideas as to how we go forward. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrew. And I think that's a really good way to set the tone for this session. And actually, you mentioned NatWest, and we will have somebody from NatWest on the panel, Oliver. And also you mentioned Scottish Power, and we'll actually be hearing from the parent company, Iberdrola, in relation to the work that they're doing in Spain. So actually thinking about how is this going global and what is happening in different countries. First, though, I'm going to introduce Giulio Berruti, who is from BSR, he's the director of BSR, to talk about the SME Climate Hub and some of the tools that are actually being developed to support SMEs in decarbonising their businesses. Giulio.
All right. Hi, everybody, and hope you can hear me okay. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Giulio Berruti. I'm a director with BSR. In the climate team. So for those of you who are not familiar with BSR, that's possible. We are a global non-profit organization that works with a network of around 300 companies with the mission of building a just and sustainable world. We are a global organization and work with businesses, mainly large companies, but we'll hear today about the SME Climate Hub as well, through consulting, research, and cross-sectoral collaboration. We are a member of the Women Business Coalition, whom we thank very much for being here today as well. And as you know, or you might know, Women Business is one of the key partners of the SME Climate Hub, together with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, the International Chamber of Commerce, and the Race to Zero. The initiative provides small and medium businesses, so defined as the businesses with less than 500 employees, a one-stop shop to make a climate commitment and take action with tools and resources they can use to mitigate their environmental impact and build resilient businesses for the future. So as a first step, in particular, the SMEs can take the SME Climate Commitment and pledge to halve emission before 2030 and strive to achieve net zero emission before 2050. A set of tools and resources is then being made available to them. Currently, SMEs can access a set of publicly available resources that guide them through measurement, GHG reduction, and strategy setting. And the hub will be expanded in time to provide more and more support with tailored tools and incentives that SMEs can leverage to take action. We talked about barriers that SMEs face, and one of the key barriers that SMEs face is knowledge, is lack of knowledge. This is consistently reported through geographies and supply chains and in many surveys that exist about SMEs. In a recent survey that Women Business run through the SMEs that took the climate commitment showed that 63% of the respondents noted that skills and knowledge are a primary barrier to action. And so to bridge this gap, I'm very pleased to talk about a new tool, which is called Climate Fit, Net Zero Training for SMEs, that we at BSR, together with the team at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership and in partnership with the Women Business Coalition, are launching later this week. It is a practical, free online training that helps SMEs reduce the carbon emissions and join the collective race to net zero. The approach that we took is to take the angle of business resilience. So how can climate be a lever of business resilience for companies like SMEs? And so we achieved this by focusing on 7 key modules that take SMEs through a journey on governance and strategy, operations that focuses on renewable energy, energy efficiency, fleet, for example, supply chain on how can you prioritize among your suppliers and take action to reduce your Scope 3 emission, even if you are a small business. Design, because we all know about the importance of designing for net zero from the start. finance with an idea of making the financial business case for decarbonisation. People and community, because employees and the communities around the SME can be levers and agents of change, really. And net zero and storytelling, because of the importance for all companies, including SMEs, to tell their sustainability story while they get there. The modules take 30 minutes to complete. They're self-paced and enable people to learn in their own way, in their own time. This is important considering that SMEs have limited time and limited capacity, and we want to meet everybody where they are. So completing the course will provide the SMEs that take it with practical skills, knowledge, and the confidence to start reducing emissions and become part of a global team of SMEs taking action. Importantly, also for the willingness that Mr. Griffith talked about making the hub international. The course will be available in English as a start, but we're already working on a Spanish translation as well, which will come. Before I turn to Bev for the follow-up, I wanted to touch on another aspect, which is a key barrier for decarbonisation of SMEs, which is access to capital. The same survey that I cited before found that the second and third reason for SMEs not to take climate action are funding and lacking demand signals. This is not surprising. And so to tackle that, in the 2 years program, we also are partnering with CISL and the team within the Banking Environment Initiative to explore financial incentives that SMEs can leverage to accelerate decarbonization. In 2021, we started looking at the major barriers to unlock for SMEs to take climate action. We researched financial incentives, looking at supply chain finance mechanisms and financial loans linked to sustainability that some banks and some buyers are working on to serve their suppliers or the SME customers. In a few days, we will be releasing some initial findings about how SMEs can use these findings and leverage them in the conversation with buyers, with banks, with governments to access that funding in a better way. And the work will continue, and I'll hope to share more findings next time we talk about how SMEs, corporates, and banks can work together to decarbonize. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Giulio. Now, a session about SMEs wouldn't be right without having the voice of SMEs here. We decided that the best way to do this was to actually go to some of those within our immediate network, and we did an interview with them in advance of COP, which was recorded with our CEO, Claire Shine. I'm therefore now going to, we're going to play a video which shares some of both what they're doing as a business, but also the challenges that they are facing, which we'll then kind of explore through the discussion following. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm going to ask the first question to Rosalie Riklova. Ros, as an SME, why do you feel it's important to reduce your carbon emissions?
Hello, Claire. Thanks so much. I'm Rosalie from Thermulon, and we're a startup working on sustainable insulation materials for buildings that can keep them energy efficient without compromising on fire safety. And as an SME, and especially startups like ours, we have the benefit, quite often, the benefit of a clean slate. And this rings true especially for physical products, where up to 80% of the carbon footprint of a product or a manufacturing process gets locked in at design stage. And SMEs, startups, smaller companies, we often have the benefit of at least partially a clean slate where we can design in sustainable building practices.
Okay, let me bring in Frankie Phillips now. Frankie, in sustainable fashion, how does it work for your SME?
Well, I'm Frankie, and I run the manufacturing hub, the Responsible Manufacturing Hub for a British fashion company. And we basically produce clothing in ways which we don't compromise, monitor everything. And yes, I'm a startup, a small business, but I actually think that small businesses have a much bigger impact than people think. mean, for my own business, we produce for large companies. So actually the impact we have is actually pretty big. So, I mean, it's so important for us to reduce our carbon emissions. And with that, we actually reduce other companies because obviously we produce for them, and we do all of that kind of low impact work to make it easier for them. And you know, I'm a big believer that if we start with low impact way of working, you know, it's built right into our in our DNA right at the start, then it's so much easier to keep that same focus as we grow and scale up.
So Frankie, what steps have you taken already, and how have you been supported on this journey?
I mean, everything we do is carbon emission focused. I mean, down to the super fine details. We work really closely with our supply chain, from fabric mill to logistics to monitoring our carbon footprint. And you know, I've got a big old spreadsheet that's huge, takes over a whole wall of like every single garment, where it's come from, how it's been processed, and we work really closely with our supply chains all over. And you know, I mean, I do believe we don't know where we're starting from when it comes to how our clothing are made. Like, how can we possibly improve it? Most of the brands and retailers that I've worked with have no idea where their garments are even sewn together, let alone where their cotton was grown. I'd say the biggest support was our supply chain partners. I mean, they've been incredible, and it's, you know, especially over the last 2 years, you know, we've supported each other, and it's working with them has meant that I've been able to work on the ideas, and we've been able to support them as well. And I think it's a huge, having that partnership and that trust within your supply chain is so important.
So Rosalie, how have you been supported, and what have been the main challenges you're facing in decarbonising your business?
So with our material, we're working with a physical product to tackle the physical challenge of climate change and building efficiency. And now there's actually a really big drive from customers who demand change, and there's a huge demand for sustainable products. But for rolling of physical products, there's always longer time periods, and it requires mission-driven, patient, capital mission-driven customers, and a stable policy environment.
Mm-hmm. And Frankie, what have been your main challenges you're facing?
It's a tricky one, but I'd say it's a mixture of industry pushback and lack of funds. I mean, trying to explain to a brand or a retailer that I can't make that order because I just don't believe that it's ethical. It's hard conversations to have. I mean, I've turned down business because I can't accept prices that low, because it becomes exploitation to the workers, and trying to explain that to the retailers is difficult. But I can't compromise. And trying to explain that to our shareholders, that's a tricky one. I mean, obviously, reducing our impact is possible. We know how to do it. We know exactly what needs to be done. But it takes me longer because I haven't had the funds to be able to push forward quick enough. I mean, it's taken me 24 months to get a new fibre in the market because we had to fund it ourselves. And if I'd had that investment, that would have been halved easily. But we did it, regardless. And new range launched, new fibres we're putting out in the market. And with that, we cut out all synthetic chemicals. We reduced our water by 90% and our energy by 75%, which is huge. And there's obviously more to come.
And what support do you think SMEs need to help them really decarbonise?
I mean, I'd say more options for funding without so many barriers and hurdles to jump over, being listened to in bigger rooms like this one. I feel like many startups are full of people who really do know what they're talking about. And I really do believe that doing good is good business. Building a business which doesn't take responsibility for its actions environmentally and ethically just simply shouldn't be in business at all. And a lot of the startups now are being built on a completely different way that they were before. They're built on being ethically focused, and it's just so important to support that.
Right. And Rosalie, a last question for you. What advice would you give to other SMEs who are considering taking action to reduce their footprint? And what opportunities could this open up?
So I would say make concrete plans for really, really bold action. And the biggest advice I can give is just none of us can do it alone. just look for a broader network of other small businesses, startups, industry associations, innovation hubs, whatever there may be around your industry cluster, around your geographical cluster, because the collective knowledge is huge. You know, whatever lessons I may have learned, Frankie may have learned, I want to share that to save someone else's time in maybe not having to repeat similar mistakes. And these opportunities are out there, and they come with everything. It may come with tips and tricks on how to find funding, on how to find sustainable supply chains, how to serve customers better in a sustainable way, so that overall we can make our businesses better, we can make the world around us better while serving our customers, our shareholders, and our broader stakeholder communities.
That is a great call to action from both of you. Thank you, Frankie. Thank you, Rosalie.
And I echo that thanks to Rosalie and Frankie. Now, I'd welcome our panelists to come and join us. And I'm going to invite you each in turn to introduce yourselves and just in the context of how you are supporting SMEs. Gonzalo, do you want to? So I think we'll start at the end and work this way. So Julian, would you like to go first?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julian Hunt, and I head up Public Affairs, Communications, Sustainability for Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners here in Great Britain. And for us, as we think about how we deliver our net zero strategy, it is all about the partnerships we've got to forge with suppliers. I mean, essentially, 90% of the reductions we've got to make have got to come through Scope 3, so it is the working closely with suppliers. We're focusing, to be fair, on our top 100 strategic suppliers because they'll make the biggest difference, but we're encouraging all of our suppliers to really embrace some of the key things, using renewable energy, setting targets that are science-based, and reporting on their carbon emissions and making it part of our procurement conversations, but in that spirit of collaboration. And also picking up on that video, we've set up a little business within our business called CCEP Ventures, and their remit is absolutely just to pick up on some of the themes, to provide some of that patient capital to new startups that are delivering really interesting innovations in things like new package-free technologies for beverages or new recycling technologies. So exciting things are happening, I think, and we've got ways of trying to engage and tap into some of that entrepreneurial spirit.
Fantastic. Thank you. Peter.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I've got two hats on. I'm a co-chair of the Corporate Leaders Group with Colin Matthews from EDF. I represent Anglian Water, so water and energy, sort of as co-chairs of the Corporate Leaders Group, and quite an interesting interplay between those things, which we might touch on a little bit later. As was said earlier, Corporate Leaders Groups have been very keen to get smaller companies involved, and we had our first SME join us in this last year, which is great because that's actually part of the drive that we're pushing forward on. But just think about Anglian Water in terms of how have we helped SMEs over the years. I suppose with clarity about what we're trying to achieve as a business, and we set an ambition over 12 years ago to, for example, halve our embodied or capital carbon in absolutely everything we build. And we set a very clear ambition, and that enabled our supply chain to think about that and engage with it. And guess what? Today, we're at 61% against that ambition that we set in 2010. So we're 61% less capital carbon. How's that come about? Well, it hasn't come about as a result of things I've come up with. It's come about as a result of innovation and collaboration, and it's come from SMEs. It's come from great ideas and great thinking, but it's come as a result of having that stable platform of saying, this is what we're trying to achieve as a business, how can you help? The other part to it, though, has been setting up some innovation platforms to actually make it easy. So we set up something called our Innovation Shop Window, a geographical area where we encouraged companies to come in and try some of their products and services on that particular journey. And we provided that, I think Andrew referred to it as warm and cuddly, that warm and cuddly feeling for an SME to come and work with us and try and sometimes fail as well and come back and try again. So absolute clarity about what we're trying to achieve, saying you come in and play on this pitch and actually we're going to help you to be successful. And then that'll give you the ability to access other markets outside of just our geographic area and outside of this country and outside of just the water markets. And the other bit, the sort of build on that, this sort of approach to innovation that we started off, that's now translated across the whole of the water industry. So all water companies have now committed to net zero by 2030. So we've got that common ask across the water industry. So SMEs know if they've got products and services that are going to contribute to that, there's that very clear commitment. And not only a commitment, a visible roadmap. So if you go on Water UK's website, you will see the path to net zero. You'll see the industry commitment. You'll see the sorts of things that we're interested in, whether it be about energy efficiency or whether it be about renewables. You'll see the journey. And if, as an SME, that gives you something to play into. And the last piece is alignment between the industry and its regulator. So there's an innovation fund, some £200 million. A lot of that money is being allocated into innovations that SMEs are actually driving. And the water industry has set up, if you like, an incubator called Spring, which is essentially how do we help SMEs to come in and play on that turf, not just for Anglian Water, but across the whole of the water industry. And that has really ticked up and done incredibly well. We've got loads and loads of projects focused on our ambition to get to net zero coming out of that. So just some examples.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. Oliver.
Thanks very much. So hi, I'm Ollie Holborn, Head of Strategy at NatWest. I'll make a couple of comments. Firstly, on our supply chain, we came out with a new supply chain charter in the beginning of 2020. And the reason that we did that is because we wanted our supply chain to become more sustainable, not just in terms of reducing carbon emissions, but also in terms of making sure that our suppliers are treating their workforces appropriately, paying the living wage, and so on. We also partnered with a group called EcoVadis, who help us measure whether our supply chain is actually sustainable. So there are also some really simple things you need to do for SMEs. So you need to improve the payment terms. So what we did during COVID is we said rather than the typical 60-day payment, we're going to do 30 days for SMEs, anyone less than 50 employees, and we've kept that going forward. So I think you need to, climate super important, but it's broader than that to make sure that your supply chain is sustainable. So that's the first comment I'll make. The second comment I'll make, listening to Frankie and Rosalie, a huge part of helping SMEs decarbonise is financing. And that's where our biggest role and our biggest influence is. And you said that, in the UK, the number of businesses, it's in excess of 99%. But even on kind of output measures, it's still huge. It's 50% of turnover, it's 60% of employment, it's 30% of our emissions. And so the reason that we came up with, a very large number of 100 billion from now until 2025 in terms of sustainable funding and financing is because there is demand there. So we set ourselves a target 2 years ago to get 20 billion of sustainable funding and financing, and we met that within 18 months. So we're here to say, we want to supply that finance. And I'll just make another point, which is the easiest way to halve the emissions that we finance would be to stop doing half the business. I mean, that's clearly impossible and it's never going to work. But the reason that we have these big numbers is because we think the demand is there. But let's get very, very specific. In our report that we just published on the Springboard for Sustainable Recovery, there's a little business called Cooper King Distillery, and it makes net zero gin. What does that actually mean? Well, all of its electricity is from renewables, and then for every bottle it produces, it plants 2 trees. That means you buy net zero gin on the shelf. Turnover went up by 22% in 6 months. So by reducing your carbon footprint, as Frankie says, you can become more sustainable, more resilient, and you can grow your business. And I think the one thing I'll leave you with before I pass over to Gonzalo is this is a huge growth opportunity as well as a resilience opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you. Gonzalo.
Okay, good afternoon to everyone. I'm also wearing 2 hats. I'm Vice President of the Spanish Green Growth Group. That is an alliance of 60 firms, big and small, defending ambitious climate objectives and the opportunities that can arise in this area. And second, I'm Director of Climate Change of Iberdrola Group. So Scottish Power is in the Iberdrola Group, and in this respect, we are supporting this fantastic COP. So as the Spanish Green Growth Group, we are convinced that the small and medium enterprises must play a key role in decarbonizing. So in this group, we have pioneers, SMEs, that shows the road to other firms, but also we have big firms like Iberdrola, Ferrovial, Telefonica in different sectors that can play a big role mobilizing their supply chain. So we are doing a lot of things in the Spanish Growth Group. We have collaborative projects, you know. We are supporting in finance. For instance, we are helping these firms to get advantage of the recovery fund programs of the European Union. And what I think is important, we really support alliances. That's why we are members of the Corporate Leaders Group. We think it's the most powerful alliance in Europe. And 2 weeks ago, we supported the launching in Spain of the Women Business SME Climate Action Hub. So we are convinced, it was launched, it's very important, with the support of the Spanish government, and we are convinced that it will play a key role to mobilize action in small and medium enterprises. I want to say something. There are a lot of opportunities, but the competition, the global competition to take these opportunities is really strong, because this sector is moving really, really fast. So our view is that you have to be proactive and you have to be very fast to take the opportunities. Otherwise, you can put your firm in risk. So it's opportunities, but also risks. And as Iberdrola, and I will end, we are a big firm, we are also doing a lot to mobilize our supply chain. We have established a target to have at least 70% of our main suppliers, we started with the main suppliers, to sustainable practice, focusing on climate change. And climate change is one of the specific areas of focus on this respect. We are collecting info of suppliers, climate policies, target and procedures, and we are working with them in improving their plans. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So you've all spoken about ways in which you're engaging SMEs and some of the opportunities there. I want to go back to the video, and Frankie and Rosalie mentioned some of the challenges that they're facing, obviously with their customers, their suppliers, and both ways of the supply chain. So I just wondered whether some of you could actually give some reflections on that in terms of the challenges you're seeing SMEs facing, either within your sector or in terms of your direct supply chains or value chains, if you think to your customers as well. So Julian?
Shall I jump in? I mean, we're looking at this in the value chain perspective. So it is indeed people who supply us, but also the people that we supply. And if I tell you there are something like 280,000 outlets that will sell soft drinks here in Great Britain, not all of them are the big companies, the big retailers that you'll be very familiar with. Most are independent outlets. And we did a bit of a survey of some of them in the hospitality sector at the beginning of the year, and about 500 shared their views. And no surprise, 3/4 put climate change as the biggest issue that our industry needed to address. But actually about half said they were really struggling to make sense of what net zero meant, and picking up on some of the points mentioned earlier, really understanding the practical implications of all of that. And there were lots of barriers. Some were, I've just got the data here, but 72% were worried about the cost. 41% said they had no idea really what even net zero meant for their business. And then 43% said, they needed help to measure emissions. So, some very common themes, I think, that come through. I mean, our solution here is we've joined forces with Pernod Ricard, with Sustainable Restaurants Association, and Net Zero Now to develop a new initiative specifically for owner-operators in the hospitality sector, to give them practical advice, practical guidance, and also a standard that will help them move towards certification. Because one thing I think a lot of the outlets there, and it's back to Ollie's point on opportunity, is they recognise if they can communicate to their consumers what they're doing through some form of certification, that will give them a bit of a competitive advantage as well. So very excited to be launching that here in Glasgow tomorrow.
Fantastic. And I mean, Frankie specifically mentioned some of the challenges around costs. So I'm going to come to you, Ollie, to actually you mentioned like some of the financial support that is needed, and just to kind of go a bit more in depth on that in terms of actually some of the challenges that SMEs are facing and how you're supporting them.
Yeah, well, I think, what SMEs, and Frankie and Rosalie are, they're not unique, but certainly if you look at the 6 million SMEs in the UK, as Julian has said, most of them won't know what net zero actually means. Most of them won't know how to measure the carbon footprint of their business. So I think it starts with measurement, which I think is why the tool, Giulio, that you're launching is so important. It's understanding, how many tons of carbon does my business emit, and what does that mean for me? How does it help me if I reduce it? Does it make my business more valuable? Does it make it cheaper to run? Well, hopefully both. But SMEs come in all different shapes and sizes. And so I think SMEs need to start with some questions, which is, do I use fossil fuels in my supply chain? Do I own the buildings that I'm running? Do I use vehicles? And depending on the answer to those questions, there will then be targeted interventions that they can make. There are some really obvious ones, like we think the biggest opportunity is actually retrofitting of commercial and residential businesses and buildings in the UK. And so us providing finance, for example, to do that will be super important. Equally, if an SME uses a lot of motorised transport, then we need to help give them financing on whether it's a small, medium or large EV fleet. So there's a huge number of things that we can do to provide finance, but it's very dependent upon how big the business is and how their business is run. But to go back to Giulio's point, until we can actually measure it, then we can only then start to reduce it and help them realise the opportunities.
Peter, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's kind of emphasising some of the things you've already said, actually, but thinking about the role of Corporate Leaders Group, thinking about the role of, say, Business in the Community, which is another great organisation. Those organisations have recognised that there's an audience called SMEs that have to be communicated with in a different way, recognising they don't have the time, they don't have some of the resources of bigger organisations. So we need to work, much as Andrew was saying earlier on, to disentangle some of this stuff and try and make it as straightforward and simple as possible, and recognise that actually a lot of the innovation and opportunities will come from it. But also reflecting on something Frankie was talking about. She was talking about time to market and the effort that has to go in. I think she was talking about particular fibre, wasn't she? And I think that's also where we need to put some of these platforms for innovation together. And the one to say that I'm involved with is this one in the water industry, where we've got a very clear commitment about what we're trying to do and what we think success looks like, which is net zero by 2030. So come and play on that journey. But also, as part of that, we have these funds, and they're set up in different ways. So there's one of them, which is through our economic regulator, called Catalyst. And essentially that is exactly targeting the sorts of ideas that are coming from very small companies sometimes that say, well, that might just be the idea that's going to make the big difference in some of these areas. And essentially it's seed call funding to get some of these things going. Now, that sort of stuff didn't exist a couple of years ago. And we're seeing a huge amount of momentum and pickup. And it just helps that first step on the journey.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And thinking about some of what you mentioned there, and also coming back to you, Gonzalo, because you mentioned about risk. And I was just going to ask, what do you see as some of the biggest risks that SMEs face of not taking action?
For me, the risk comes from not understanding the changes ahead and the technological revolution we are seeing in the energy sector. We are really amazed by the technological revolution of clean solutions, of renewables, photovoltaic, wind. Renewables are today the most competitive form to produce electricity in 90% of the world. This is a big change, but this is a big change in the power sector, so we will only need renewables. This is like a networks. So you have to understand that. If you don't understand that, you will have some risk. But this will also affect transport, because we are going to change completely the transport system. And we have the revolution of batteries and electric cars and electric vehicles, trucks. There is a debate whether green hydrogen or electricity batteries, but definitely it's going to change. We don't know the speed. We think it's going to go very fast. But in the building sector, it's the same. So, and in the hard-to-abate industries, it's going to be the same. So I think the biggest risk for suppliers is not to understand the technological and industrial revolution behind us. And to understand, for instance, and this is a very interesting thing, we are moving to a more electrified system everywhere, but the costs are going to go down. For instance, for Spanish consumers, industrial consumers, electricity is going to be cheaper than in UK because we have more sun and more wind. You have more offshore wind. But this is changing everything. So, for instance, it's a competitive advantage. For instance, in the past, the important thing or the competitive advantage was to have oil. And today, in the future, the competitive advantage will be to have sun. And this is going very fast. So not to understand the changes and not to understand the speed of the changes.
So picking up on that and thinking about, some of these are very, when we talk about SMEs, we're talking about, some of the very smallest businesses as well. But how do we support those really to kind of take the innovative ideas that they may have and to scale them up and to be able to support them to grow, which, you've all mentioned about that growth being important. So maybe Ollie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, we have 14 accelerators, business accelerators around the UK. They're all free. And they get advice there, they get space, and I think most importantly probably they get access to a network, which is what Peter has said. I think, in an old banking world, somebody'd come in to the bank manager and ask them about their business and what they could do. In a new world, that's not going to happen. We've got much more efficient ways of sharing knowledge. And I think that knowledge is going to get shared through networks. I think everyone knows that it's a team sport, but a lot of the time, if you speak to SME owners, the best thing that you can do is connect them with other SME owners in the same space who face the same challenges, which is what Frankie mentioned. That's where they'll get the knowledge. That's where they'll know how to avoid mistakes. And that's also where they'll be able to share ideas and hopefully get financing for that, that golden nugget that's a brilliant idea that just has to be scaled incredibly quickly. So I don't think there's a single answer, but I think the one thing that everyone is speaking about on this panel and this conference is that this is a team sport. And so we sort of need to put down some of the old competitive dynamics and all make this happen together. So whether it's Peter's network, whether it's the BITC network, whether it's our network or Iberdrola's, there's just a huge power of us and the network that we need to capitalize on.
So I suppose then that, because a lot of that is about communication and how we actually reach a lot of those companies, the smallest or just even if it's an individual, right up to the medium size. So, I mean, what are some of the ways that you are doing that within your different supply chains? So maybe coming to you first, Julian.
Sure. I mean, Andrew touched on it in his opening remarks. I think the power of the trade associations for our sectors should not be underestimated, and certainly in the food and drink sector, really pleased that all of our major associations across the agri-food sector are really helping debunk some of the myths around this and helping to educate smaller companies and share best practice and show how to collaborate and share the information that's needed. Because I think making it very sector specific, it makes it very relevant and ensures that it stays very practical, and these are things that we're hearing all the time. And then it is just a constant drumbeat of communications. We were really pleased we got an A rating for our supplier engagement in the CDP survey last year. I mean, very proud of that because it shows, I think, how far our procurement teams are putting energy and effort into the ways that they communicate with all suppliers. Yes, there is a focus on immediate action with those top 100 strategic suppliers, but we try and engage everybody in our business. And we have to change as well as a mindset. We've got to be much more open to the entrepreneurial ideas. When we look at the 22 areas we're going to focus investments in the coming years to take down our carbon footprint, we realise we don't have all the answers, and neither do those big suppliers. So we're constantly getting surprised in a good way by people coming up with great new ideas that we can take on. I mean, one very practical example from GB was it was an entrepreneurial landowner with an entrepreneurial energy company that came to us and said, we can build you a solar farm in Yorkshire, buy your biggest factory. For those who don't know the geography of the UK, that raised quite a few eyebrows to begin with, that you could put a solar farm in Yorkshire, but that is now supplying 20% of that factory's needs for energy, and it's on land that couldn't actually be put back to use as farmland. So it's getting a second lease of life.
And just to say, for those that don't know Yorkshire, it's traditionally wet, not very sunny. So now, you talked about obviously, kind of how to engage, and I'm just thinking with, in Spain, you've got the launch of the new SME Climate Hub there. Gonzalo, I was just wondering, what do you see as some of the challenges coming up in terms of actually how you start engaging SMEs in that? And in some ways, Andrew was talking about how quickly we've managed to engage SMEs within, but there's been a real campaign, behind it within the UK to really get that sign up, to get that engagement, and it's still ongoing. There's the bus that, if you see it anywhere, it's a green bus going around the UK. So what are some of the things that you're looking to do within Spain, also some of the challenges that you see coming up?
We have everything to do. I agree that we are at the beginning of the journey. So at our Spanish Green Growth Group, we have like a specific project for MSME. I think it's very important. One thing that has been touched here is that is industrial policy. So there are a lot of opportunities out there, but countries, we cannot support everything because the resources are scarce. So we have to find where, for instance, for a Spanish firm, where sectors where we think we are competitive. And to focus all industrial policy in this specific sector, because at the end of the day, you need to be competitive to take advantage of the opportunities. For instance, in Spain, we have water issues. We think we are competitive, desalination, we have very good firms there. And water has always been a very scarce resource in Spain, so we have competitive advantage. In the energy sector, in renewables as well, and I don't know, in batteries. So I think one of the key elements will be to focus on sectors and of course on collaborative projects between big firms, government and alliances, but in a specific sector. So in Spain we are focusing on sectors where we think we are going to be competitive in a global sphere.
Beverly, just one thing I think we have to remember is that a lot of SMEs at the moment are trying to figure out how to emerge from the pandemic in a positive way. If you look at the Bank of England data, SMEs in aggregate are 25% more in debt in the UK than they were before. We approved something like £15 billion worth of government financing. Now, the government, I think, has been very sensible in the time period that they're allowing companies to repay those loans, but we have to remember that SMEs have a huge range of things that they need to do, and so we need to balance the help we give them to emerge positively from the pandemic, as well as focusing on climate, which is hugely important. But if we just go out, and I know we won't, and just sort of shout and scream climate at them, that will turn them off. So I think it's how we balance those communications in a sensible way, in a language that they can understand.
Just a reflection, I suppose, it's also about trying to be clear about what the ask is as well, isn't it? So it's all very well us talking at one level, but in reality we've got to decode it and say, well, this is what we're trying to do, say the water sector in the UK, this is what we're trying to do. These are some of the pathways that we think will actually achieve net zero by 2030, which starts to give areas of opportunity for you as an SME. And then to the point that you were making earlier, part of our role can be not only in terms of incubating and helping ideas come, but also making those connections and drawing those connections between different offerings. And all of a sudden, you move from, for example, a simple sensor that a company wants to produce to detect leakage in a different way, which enables us to produce less water and save energy, save carbon. And you tie it together with other sensors, and then you tie it together with artificial intelligence. And they're all coming from different suppliers, and then all of a sudden, you've got a smart system that enables you to do things that an entirely different way to how you'd have traditionally thought about doing it. And that, again, is the role of, I think, bigger businesses, because we can actually play that sort of integration role and help bring those things together and help create some of those networks. So I think that is part of our duty and our obligation in this.
Fantastic. Now, I've been asking the questions, but I did just want to check whether anyone in the audience would like to ask a question at all. If there's any kind of things that are on your mind that you'd like to put to any of our panelists. If so, yeah. And please, I might need you to come up to speak here, or we'll quickly pass you a microphone because we need to get you on the live stream. So do you want to come?
Hello, and thank you very much. My name is Stefan Büttner. I'm chair of the UNECE Task Force on Industrial Energy Efficiency. And I'm wondering whether in that work that you're doing, that you've described, you have also had the opportunity to assess the huge variety of needs that SMEs are facing, considering that industry or businesses themselves are spread across about 30 subsectors, and I understand it's really hard to get a valid picture of everybody's needs, particularly since I guess it's mainly the challenge to interest them into something that is not their daily business. So triggering the decision to decide to do something. Thanks.
Is it great to kick off with that one? It's a great question. I mean, I suppose we've been looking at, some of the things I've been saying, we've been looking at it from the perspective of what those SMEs produce in terms of products or services into our businesses. But if we think about it, flick it the other way and think about them as businesses and them as sectors, I think it's really important that we look at them in terms of the sectoral areas. So I think the point was made earlier about the power of trade associations. Well, if we think about those trade associations and we think about how we, say for us as a water company, interface with them, or how we as business in the community interface with them, or how we as corporate leaders interface with them, what's relevant to give them into that particularly sectoral approach? So that's certainly a piece of work that we're doing, I know, in business in the community at the moment, thinking about how we target the offering in a sectoral way, so that those SMEs within that particular area get something which is more relevant to them than something which is perhaps just a bit too generic.
And if I just come in, just pulling some of the threads from other speakers, I think we've got to engage companies in a way that makes practical sense. So one of the learnings we've had from the work we've been doing this year in the hospitality sector is people get the climate crisis, but they want to know what they can do about it in very practical ways. So when you talk to them about energy, we found going in, and a lot of pubs that we did pilots with, we found we're not following best practice with energy management. We're not using the latest kit that would get them more energy efficient. And so it was explaining, the implications of that in terms of cost, but also their overall carbon footprint, talking about renewable energy tariffs, which can reduce their carbon footprint very quickly, but also allying that with better management and better energy practices in very practical ways, gets them the win-win of reducing carbon and saving money as well. And it's finding the ways of really bringing it to life, I think, is critical in this space.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of try and address your question directly, Stefan, I don't think we're at the point yet where we have enough data to be able to say this sector, these are the interventions. But I think what you need to get to, and hopefully the tool that's been launched today will help, is you need a matrix of this is the size of my company and this is the sector, and therefore based on that matrix, these are the 4 or 5 suggestions that we would make for you to do this. Call up your bank or your supplier and have a conversation with them as to how you can take those 4 or 5 actions. But I don't think we're there yet. I think it'll take us a year or 2 of gathering more data before we can do that.
If I may complement to that, we have been doing that from another angle in Germany for the past 5 to 6 years, doing projects on triggering decisions to invest to do energy efficiency in industrial SMEs. And there we dissect from about 1,000 companies per sector, size, geography, what matters, what the issues are. For example, energy management. About 50% of micro and small companies don't do any way of structured energy management, no matter what means. And they are stuck with doing the easy things. And there I can only invite you and everybody else to collaborate also with the task force, because we are gathering exactly that data also for 88 additional countries. So happy to share. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, sadly, we're going to have to very soon bring this to an end, but I wanted to ask you each to do a closing point. And on this, I mean, you're all leading companies. You're here because you understand this, because you're taking, quite strong action on this, and you are pressing ahead in your sectors. But obviously, there are many businesses that we need to still bring along on that journey. And many of them may not have started to engage their supply chains yet, and therefore there's a massive opportunity there. So I wondered, what advice would you give to other large companies who are going on this journey in terms of how they engage their SMEs in their supply chains?
Shall I kick off it? I mean, if companies are not already engaging their suppliers, larger companies, then absolutely you must start to talk to the people who deliver the goods and services that you use in your business. And it is that constant communication, and also, be clear with your suppliers. Set the goals that you want them to strive for, whether it's setting targets that are science-based, switching to renewable electricity, sharing data, but set tangible commitments that you need from your supplier base, whatever the size of that business, because nothing will focus minds more than when you're setting some goals for people to follow.
Peter?
I was just thinking, actually, I think it was Rosalie made the point about that stability and demand, certainty about demand, and that comes to the point about us being clear about what we're doing. So making those commitments and be very clear about what those commitments are in terms of what we're trying to do, because that gives you some indication of the sorts of things that are going to work for you as an organisation. I think always for large businesses to encourage them to group together, and the more that we can get sectoral commitments to things, the more that will give confidence to the supply chain that they're playing into something that's useful. So if you're in the UK at the moment, you know that every water company is committed to net zero by 2030. You know what the route map looks like because you can go online, you can see it, it's all there. So actually, you know that every single water company is going to be receptive to some of the stuff you're going to be doing. So the more organisations that can group together and do that, the better. And of course, it also helps with asks of government, because we can go to government and say, well, we're doing this. If you could tweak that bit, that would be a bit easier. And by the way, it's all of us talking. So that's a big one. And the last point I'd make is the one I sort of emphasised earlier on, which is, create the environment to help. Those innovation platforms, they're things that we can do as big businesses that will really help those small businesses take the first step. So why wouldn't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, every big business is going to have to get to net zero. That's the bottom line. It's just a question of how quickly we do it. Wouldn't it be funny if in 3 or 4 years' time, those companies big companies that have moved first and got their supply chains in order, we're in a better place from a cost of capital perspective from companies that weren't. I think that's going to happen. And I think the Chancellor today announcing, the Sustainable Disclosure Reporting Initiative is really important because that will bring transparency. But I think, it's a team sport. Let's talk to one another. Let's share our learnings. And like every kind of human problem, we always solve it by sharing knowledge, talking to each other about how we do it, and then sharing best practice and doing that.
Fantastic. And finally to you, Gonzalo.
Yes, 3 messages. Well, as big firms and business associations focus on climate change, we are convinced of the key role MSCs have to play on climate action and the opportunities, the business opportunities. Second, I think we are developing a lot of activities to support them. It's true, but we have to recognize that we are at the beginning of the journey and we have to do much more things and with urgency. And I think alliances are extremely important. And the final thing is that we think this initiative, the SME Climate Hub, is very timely. It's filling a gap, and we think it's key to accelerate the action and one of the best platforms in the world to support MSCs. Thank you.
Fantastic. And big thank you to all of you for being our wonderful panelists today. Now, for those who would like to find out more about the SME Climate Hub, do please go and look it up online. There is, if you go through actually the UK side, there is a UK page, and I know Sam is sat at the front of me looking at me, kind of go, make sure you mention it. So please do, and also, obviously do go up and look up the Spanish, SME Climate Hub as well, and do please take a look on there. There's lots of tools and resources. As Giulio mentioned, we are launching the Climate Fit, which is a new tool later in the week, and that will be, if you go, that will be on the SME Climate Hub. We'll also, as CISL, be doing a press release around that and some media. So please do, if you want some more information, that my colleague G is also at the back of the room as well and able to answer any questions on it, including on the way that we engage SMEs at CISL, which obviously for us going forward is very important and we see as a critical part of our strategy. So thank you very much to everyone for listening today and for being here, both here and online. And thank you very much again to our panelists. Thank you.